Imagine the sun setting for the very last time, not in a blaze of glory, but in the blinding flash of 1,000 man-made stars. This isn't a movie script. This was the terrifying reality for a handful of people who held the fate of the world in their hands. They had just minutes to decide as the gears of war began to turn, not by an act of aggression, but by accident. These are the stories of humanity's final 5 minutes, and how a few unsung heroes chose to save us all. For decades, the world lived under a strange paradox called mutually assured destruction, or MAD. It's a fitting acronym, right? The only thing keeping the peace was the promise that any nuclear attack would be met with an overwhelming counterattack, guaranteeing that everyone would lose. It was a peace held together by a threat. But this fragile balance was tested again and again, not by generals declaring war, but by computer glitches, bad data, and plain old human error. On several occasions, the apocalypse was dialed up, the launch sequence was initiated, and the only thing standing between us and the end of the world was the courage of one person to say, "Wait a minute." The man who disobeyed orders. The year is 1983. The Cold War is at its absolute iciest. Tensions are sky-high after the Soviets shot down a Korean passenger jet, and NATO is running a massive war game called Able Archer 83, which just so happens to simulate a full-scale nuclear attack. The Kremlin is paranoid, convinced this exercise might be a cover for a real first strike. Deep inside a secret bunker near Moscow, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov starts his shift as the duty officer for the Soviet Union's nuclear early warning system. It's just after midnight on September 26th. His job is simple. If the satellites spot incoming American missiles, he reports it up the chain. That report would trigger a devastating Soviet retaliation. Suddenly, a piercing alarm shatters the silence. A massive screen flashes a single blood-red word: launch. The system says one intercontinental ballistic missile is streaking from the US toward the Soviet Union. Petrov's heart pounds. His training is crystal clear. He has to make the call. But as he reaches for the phone, the system updates. Now there are 2 missiles, then 3, 4, 5. Every instinct, every order he's ever received is screaming at him to report the attack. His superiors are on the line, demanding to know what's going on. But something feels off. Just a nagging doubt in the pit of his stomach. A real American first strike, he thought, would be overwhelming. Hundreds of missiles, maybe thousands, not just 5. It felt illogical. He also knew the satellite system was brand new and notoriously buggy. So, was this real? Or was it the most catastrophic computer error in history? He had minutes, maybe less, to make a choice that would literally define the future of the planet. His superiors are yelling. The sirens are wailing. The screen still says, launch. The pressure is just unimaginable. In that moment, Stanislav Petrov makes a decision. He trusts his gut over the machine. He picks up the phone and reports the unthinkable. A system malfunction. And then, he has to wait. Those were the longest minutes of his life, knowing that if he was wrong, mushroom clouds were about to bloom over his country, and he'd be the one who failed to warn them. The minutes tick by. 5, 10, 20. And then, nothing. No explosions. No fireballs. The missiles never arrived because they were never there. An investigation later confirmed the system had mistaken the sun's reflection on high-altitude clouds for missile launches. And was Petrov celebrated as a hero? Nope. He was actually reprimanded for disobeying protocol and for not filling out the logbook correctly during the crisis. But history gave him a much better title. The man who saved the world. The vote that prevented Armageddon. 9 years before Petrov's big night, the world held its breath for 13 days during the Cuban Missile Crisis. We all know the story of Kennedy and Khrushchev playing a global chess match with cities as pawns. But one of the most dangerous moments of that entire crisis didn't happen in the White House or the Kremlin. It happened in the sweltering, claustrophobic confines of a Soviet submarine deep under the Atlantic Ocean. It's October 27, 1962, a day later called Black Saturday. A Soviet submarine, B-59, is hiding near Cuba. On board are its captain, Valentin Savitsky, a political officer, and a man named Vasily Arkhipov, who was the commodore of the whole submarine flotilla. Critically, the B-59 is armed with a special weapon, a nuclear-tipped torpedo with the same destructive power as the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The sub has been out of radio contact with Moscow for days. Up on the surface, a fleet of US Navy destroyers has them surrounded. To try and force the sub to surface, the Americans start dropping small, non-lethal depth charges. But down below, with the temperature inside the sub soaring and the crew totally exhausted, those little explosions feel like a full-blown attack. The captain, Savitsky, is convinced World War III has already started. In a fit of rage and fear, he shouts, "We're gonna blast them now! We will die, but we will sink them all! We will not become the shame of the fleet!" He orders the nuclear torpedo to be prepared for launch. But there was a catch. To launch the weapon, all 3 senior officers on board had to agree. The captain, Savitsky, gave his consent. The political officer agreed too. The fate of the world came down to a single vote. It came down to Vasily Arkhipov. Can you imagine the pressure in that control room? The captain is furious, demanding they fire. The crew thinks they're under attack. But Arkhipov somehow keeps his cool. He argues against the launch, reasoning that the depth charges are just signals, not bombs. A furious argument breaks out. Savitsky is screaming, but Arkhipov refuses to back down. He becomes a lone voice of reason in a steel tomb teetering on the edge of global annihilation. Eventually, Arkhipov's calm logic wins. He talks the captain down. The order to launch is cancelled. The B-59 surfaces in the middle of the American fleet and learns that war had not in fact broken out. The world had come closer than anyone knew to nuclear war, and was saved by the quiet courage of a man who, in the most dangerous moment in human history, refused to press the button. The post-Cold War scare. You'd think that after the Soviet Union fell in 1991, these terrifying close calls would be a thing of the past. You'd be wrong. On January 25, 1995, the world stumbled to the brink once again, this time because of a weather rocket. A team of Norwegian and American scientists launched a research rocket from the coast of Norway to study the beautiful Aurora Borealis. Its mission was completely peaceful. They had even notified Russia of the launch in advance, but in a spectacular display of bureaucratic failure, that message never got to the right people at Russia's nuclear early warning stations. So when Russian radar operators saw the launch, they saw something horrifying. The rocket's speed and path looked shockingly similar to a US Trident missile launched from a submarine, a weapon designed specifically for a decapitation strike, meant to wipe out Moscow's leadership before they could even think about retaliating. Within moments, Russia's nuclear forces were on high alert. For the first and only time in history, the Cheget, Russia's nuclear briefcase, was activated and brought to President Boris Yeltsin. He and his top defense officials had just minutes to decide whether to launch a full-scale retaliatory strike against the United States. For 8 terrifying minutes, while the rest of the world was completely oblivious, the Russian president's finger was hovering over the button. His advisors watched the rocket's trajectory on their screens. They saw it climb higher and higher, and then they saw it start to separate into stages, just like a missile deploying multiple warheads. But then, just as the final decision had to be made, the rocket's path changed. Its final stage veered away from Russian airspace and fell harmlessly into the sea. It was clear this wasn't an attack. The order was given to stand down. The crisis was over in less than 25 minutes. It was a stark reminder that even with the Cold War over, thousands of nuclear weapons were still on hair-trigger alert, and a simple lost memo could still accidentally start the end of the world. From a satellite glitch, to a vote in a submarine, to a misplaced note about a weather rocket, humanity has stared into the abyss more times than we'd like to admit. And these are just a few of the documented cases. In 1961, a B-52 bomber literally broke apart in midair over North Carolina, dropping 2 hydrogen bombs. On one of them, only a single simple safety switch prevented a detonation 250 times more powerful than the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. Our survival so far hasn't been thanks to flawless technology or perfect systems. Our systems are flawed. Our tech fails. We've survived because in those critical moments, when the alarms were blaring and the computers were screaming for Armageddon, a few brave people had the courage to do the hardest thing imaginable: to pause, to question, and to choose humanity over protocol. Their stories are a chilling reminder that the deadliest threat we face isn't just the weapons we've built, but the terrifying possibility that a simple mistake could unleash them. We've been lucky, but in a world still filled with thousands of these weapons, can we really afford to rely on luck forever? If you found these stories of survival and sheer human guts compelling, subscribe for more deep dives into the critical moments that have shaped our world. These events are more than just history. They're lessons we have to remember. Let us know in the comments which of these close calls you find the most terrifying.